Hi, my name is Venus William, 29 years old, an interior architect in Seattle. I spent my entire 20s working myself to exhaustion, skipping parties and vacations, just to finally buy my first home, a small villa by Lake Sammamish, where every corner carries the mark of my hands and my dreams. But no one in my family saw it as an accomplishment. They only called me selfish, cold, only thinking about yourself, especially when my younger sister Taylor, an influencer who never quite made it, still lived with our parents and complained that she couldn't afford a decent place to film her videos. So when I agreed to let her use my backyard as the venue for her wedding, everyone praised me, saying I'd finally learned how to share. I didn't know that decision would begin a chain of days where my kindness would be stretched to its breaking point. 2 weeks after the wedding, when a large moving truck rolled up my driveway and the morning sunlight reflected off the windows, Taylor stepped out, smiling brightly, ready to open the trunk. But then she froze, her face turning pale when she saw the man in a gray suit waiting at the end of the driveway, holding a thick black folder. My lawyer. And in that moment, I realized that family isn't always the safest place. Sometimes, they're the first ones to demand what you built with your own blood and tears. Have you ever had your kindness turned into a weapon by your own family? I'd love to hear your story and tell me where you're listening from, so I know I'm not alone. I was born into a middle-class family in Portland, Oregon, where everything always revolved around an unspoken rule. Taylor is the light, and Venus should try not to dim it. I was the eldest, 3 years old when my sister was born. From the moment Taylor let out her first cry, my parents' entire world seemed to shift toward her. Mom said Taylor had a smile that makes everyone love her, while I had eyes that looked a bit distant. When I scored high on tests, they said, "It's good you try hard, but your sister has real natural talent." When Taylor doodled a messy little drawing, it was immediately stuck on the fridge like a masterpiece. I learned early that in our home, love was never distributed evenly, it leaned entirely toward the ones who knew how to make others feel happy. My father was an accountant, and my mother taught literature. Both believed that family love matters more than anything. But their definition of family always meant that I had to yield, to endure, to stay silent. When Taylor failed her first college entrance exam, my mother said, "That's okay, not everyone is meant for school. Your sister has a gift for communication." When she dropped out a second time to start an online cosmetics business, my parents could barely contain their pride. They even loaned her $5,000 from their retirement fund, and when the project collapsed after just 3 months, they said, "Failure is the mother of success." See, at least she dared to try. I said nothing, though a bitter laugh rose inside me. I had dared to try too, but no one ever patted my shoulder for it. When I got accepted into the University of Washington to study architecture, my mother only asked, "Seattle is expensive, are you sure?" My father added, "Don't make us send extra money." I nodded, because I was already used to taking care of myself. I worked part-time at the library, at coffee shops, and took on small interior design projects to pay for tuition and rent. Meanwhile, Taylor stayed home, ate mom's cooking, drove dad's car, and posted photos of her independent lifestyle on Instagram. Every time I visited, I found my old bedroom turned into her studio lights, white backdrop, and a vision board that read in big, bold letters, "Future Influencer." Mom would look at it with tears in her eyes and whisper, "See? She really has passion." After graduation, I was hired by an interior design firm in Seattle. I started from the bottom, worked endless overtime, but carried a quiet determination in my heart. I had no one to rely on, and that made me stronger. 10 years later, I finally earned enough to buy my dream home, a small villa by Lake Sammamish, with glass walls overlooking the shimmering water and a garden I designed myself, where the sunset streamed through rows of maple trees. When I signed the contract, I cried. Not just from happiness, but from relief. Because at last, I had a place that was truly mine, a place no one could step into and claim to share. But that joy didn't last long. When I showed my parents pictures of the house, their first reaction wasn't congratulations. My mother said, "You're living alone. Buying such a big house is a bit wasteful, don't you think?" My father added, "You should have thought about investing in something for the future or maybe helping your sister a little." I just smiled. In the calls that followed, my mother would subtly slip in lines like, "Taylor is really trying. But things are tough financially," or, "Maybe you could let her rent a room, it would be convenient for both of you." I always refused with silence. What I didn't say was this: I knew that if she stayed once, she would never leave. Every holiday, I still drove back to Portland, trying to preserve what we called family ties. But the dinner table was never peaceful. When I mentioned getting promoted, Mom would ask, "Your sister is taking a digital marketing course. Could you help her film some videos?" When I bought a new car, Dad said, "Your sister's old one barely runs. Could you let her borrow yours for a few months?" Gradually, I realized that every success of mine only gave them a new reason to chip away at it. I didn't hate them, but I started closing myself off. Every time my mother said, "You have so much, just share a little with your sister," I would only respond with a faint smile. In my head, the same thought played over and over. They have no idea how much I've sacrificed to earn what I have. I didn't go out, didn't date for years, because I believed happiness should come only after you've built a solid life. And now, when I finally had one, they called me selfish for not giving it away. There were nights when I sat by the window, staring out at the still surface of the lake, wondering if I was wrong for wanting a small piece of peace just for myself. Or maybe, in their eyes, being the eldest daughter meant I was born to carry, to give, to yield, and never allowed to say enough. I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that I had lived by the only principle I still believed in. Independence isn't selfish, it's the only way to survive. What I didn't realize was that this very principle would soon be tested to its limit, when the sister I once protected decided to cross the final line, turning my kindness into a trap called the wedding at my house. The news of Taylor's engagement came on a spring morning when cherry blossoms had just begun to fall across the sidewalks of Seattle. I was reviewing blueprints for a lakeside home project when my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. Her voice was bright with excitement, tinged with pride. Taylor got engaged. Dylan proposed right in the middle of the restaurant. Everyone cried. "You'll come to the engagement party this weekend, won't you?" I smiled, trying to hide the sigh that rose in my chest. Taylor and Dylan had only been dating for 8 months, and I knew Dylan, a fitness coach turned TikToker, had little to offer beyond muscles and a talent for saying exactly what people wanted to hear. But I still congratulated them, because in my family, if you don't join the chorus of applause, you become the traitor. The engagement party was held at a small restaurant in downtown Portland, with all expenses covered by my parents. I drove down from Seattle, planning to stay just one night. When I walked in, the place glowed with soft lights, white balloons, and pastel roses everywhere. Taylor ran up and hugged me, her smile as flawless as in the videos she always posted. "You're here. I'm so happy. I've been telling everyone you'd help me with the decorations since you have such a great eye for design." I forced a smile, and before I could respond, Dylan slung an arm around her shoulders, his voice booming. "She's right, Venus. Your garden looks like a resort. We were just joking that if we got married there, it'd be like a dream wedding." I froze, not yet processing what he'd said, when my mother suddenly chimed in, placing a hand on my shoulder as if she'd just had a brilliant idea. "You know, that's actually perfect. Venus, why not let your sister have her wedding in your garden? It would save so much money on venue rentals and still look elegant." I nearly choked on my drink. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. My house is small, it wouldn't fit that many guests." But before I could finish, my father cut in. "Families help each other. Don't be so stingy. You live alone, why let that backyard go to waste?" I felt every gaze turn toward me, a mix of expectation and judgment. Dylan jumped in quickly, smiling like he was shooting a commercial for protein powder. "Just for one day, I promise. I'll hire a planner to handle everything. We won't make a mess or bother you at all." Taylor tilted her head, her voice dripping with sweetness that sounded almost rehearsed. "Please, sis. I've always dreamed of a wedding surrounded by nature, and nowhere feels more perfect than your home. Please say yes." The air grew thick with the sense that I'd be heartless if I refused. I looked around the table, my parents smiling expectantly, Dylan's arm wrapped around my sister's shoulders, and Taylor gazing at me with glossy, tear-brimmed eyes. I knew this act all too well. Her sweetness was never spontaneous. It was a weapon, carefully crafted to make people bend. I finished my glass of wine in one breath, then said slowly, "Fine, but only if everything goes according to my conditions." My mother clapped her hands. "Wonderful. My daughter always knows how to think for others." I took a deep breath, keeping my tone calm. "First, only the backyard can be used. No one is allowed inside the main house except to use the 2 bathrooms on the first floor. Second, the guest list is limited to 80 people, no more. Third, the event must end by 9:30 p.m. because of the neighborhood's noise regulations. And finally, you'll both sign a liability agreement, purchase event insurance, and cover all cleanup costs." The table fell silent for a few seconds before Dylan laughed lightly. "Of course, that's easy, sis. Don't worry, we'll handle everything." Taylor nodded eagerly. "I promise. I don't want to trouble you, I just want my special day to happen somewhere meaningful. You're the only family I truly trust." Her words sounded tender, but every syllable felt calculated. Everyone at the table cooed in approval, and my mother's eyes glistened. "See? She just needed a little help. That's what family is for, love and support." I nodded, but a strange feeling rose inside me. Everything was happening too quickly, too smoothly. Taylor's smile reminded me of all those past moments when she borrowed money, borrowed clothes, or borrowed my design ideas for her videos. Always polite, always sweet until she got what she wanted. I watched her squeeze Dylan's hand as she described to everyone her dream wedding by the lake. And in that moment, all I could hear was a quiet alarm ringing in the back of my mind. That night, back at the hotel, I checked my phone and saw a message from my mother. "You were wonderful, sweetheart. You did the right thing. Taylor is so happy. She said she'll be forever grateful to you." The next message came from Taylor herself. "I know you're a little worried, but I promise I'll make you proud. This wedding will make everyone remember your house." I reread that last line. Your house. Not my wedding. Something inside me tightened. I didn't reply. I just set the phone down and stared out the window, where the streetlights reflected off the glass like hundreds of eyes watching me. I'd learned to recognize the signs of trouble, and all I could see then was a giant one, flashing before the storm began. 2 weeks later, they sent me the wedding plan, a full PowerPoint presentation with dozens of slides. One of them even read, "Reception area, near the pool, perfect for drone shots." I couldn't help but laugh. The home I'd built with my blood and sweat had now been turned into a content backdrop for my sister's videos. I told myself it would all be over in a day, as long as I held firm to my boundaries. But what I didn't realize was that, in my family, boundaries were temporary lines. They only waited until I was too tired to defend them. And this time, they weren't just after my backyard. They wanted my life too. From that night on, my peaceful life by Lake Sammamish almost disappeared. Taylor started showing up at my house more often than I did, and the ironic part was, she acted as if it were perfectly normal. At first, it was just casual visits, to measure where the flowers would go, or to check the sunlight for the Save the Date video. But soon, the visits became constant, and every time she came, she brought her entire entourage: the wedding planner, stylist, photographer, and sometimes even Dylan, flying his drone low over the lake. They laughed loudly, pointed everywhere, moving around as if my home had belonged to them all along. One afternoon, I walked into my kitchen and found Taylor live streaming at my dining table, her voice sweet and cheerful. "Hi, everyone. I'm at my sister's house today, the dream wedding venue I told you about." I stood just outside the frame, trying to stay composed as she panned the camera toward me and added, "She's a bit strict, but really adorable." Thousands of virtual hearts floated across her phone screen, while inside me, a block of ice grew heavier by the second. A week later, Taylor brought the planner for another inspection. I was working when I heard the sharp clicking of heels outside. Stepping out, I saw 3 people standing in the middle of my garden, animatedly discussing how to replace the white fence with a lighter wood tone for a more rustic vibe. The planner held up a color board. If we repaint, it'll soften the look perfect for the highlight reel. Taylor nodded thoughtfully, pretending to be an expert. I cut in, no. I don't agree to change any colors. My sister turned toward me, her tone syrupy. It's just paint, sis. It won't affect anything. We just want everything to be perfect. I met her eyes and said evenly, "This is my house, not your filming studio." The air froze. The planner awkwardly closed her notebook, and Taylor pressed her lips together before muttering, "I just want my dream wedding. You're really making it hard." That evening, my mother called right away. "Venus, why did you upset your sister like that?" She cried for hours, said you don't love her. I closed my eyes, trying to keep my tone steady. "Mom, it's my house. I have the right to set boundaries." On the other end, she sighed, her voice laced with gentle reproach. "You're always talking about rights and boundaries. Why can't you just think simpler for your sister's happiness?" I didn't answer because I knew no matter what I said, it would all be twisted into one word, heartless. But it didn't stop there. One Friday evening, after a late shift at work, I stepped out of my car and froze at the sight in front of me. Dylan was standing by my front gate with 2 unfamiliar men in painters' uniforms, rolling a fresh coat of bright white paint over my old wooden gate, the deep walnut color I had carefully chosen the day I bought the house. They were painting over the fence too, the one where I used to hang wind chimes and small potted plants. I ran toward them, my voice cracking, "What are you doing?" Dylan turned around with a casual smile. "Oh, we're just freshening things up a bit. Your sister said white would match the wedding theme better. Don't worry, we're paying for it." A wave of heat surged up my neck. "This is my property, and you don't have the right to touch even an inch of it. All 3 of you, stop what you're doing and leave in 5 minutes." The painters exchanged glances, set down their rollers, and quietly packed up. Dylan, however, didn't move. He planted his hands on his hips, his voice lazy and mocking. "Venus, why are you always so uptight? It's just a gate." I stared at him, each word forced through my clenched teeth. "That gate isn't yours, and I don't need anyone telling me when I'm allowed to be upset." Dylan shrugged, pulled out his phone, and called someone, probably Taylor, before walking away. When they finally left, I stood there staring at the wet streaks of white bleeding under the fading sunlight, spreading across the fence like a wound on the place I once cherished. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Venus, what did you do this time? Dylan just told me you were yelling in the street." I let out a bitter laugh. "Mom, they started repainting my house without asking. I just told them to stop." "Oh my God," she sighed, her voice heavy with disappointment. "You're ruining your sister's wedding. It's just one day. Can't you be a little more generous? Everyone's just trying to make it a happy occasion, and you keep turning everything into drama." I looked out at the yard, where streaks of half-dried white paint still clung to the fence, and I suddenly felt as if I were standing between 2 worlds, one that I had built with sweat and sacrifice, and another filled with people who treated my hard work as nothing more than a pretty backdrop for their happiness. I hung up and sat on the porch steps, the wind from the lake cutting through me like ice. I could recall every hour, every minute I had spent working to afford this home, the nights I fell asleep over my drafting table, the mornings I left the office before dawn while the city still slept. Every corner, every brick, every door was a part of me. And yet, all they saw was a picturesque stage for wedding photos. They didn't see me, only their own reflection in the glass walls I had built. That night, when I turned off the lights, one thought crossed my mind. Maybe I'd been wrong to agree in the first place. I thought setting boundaries would be enough, but I'd forgotten one thing in this family: my boundaries never meant anything. Once they got used to my kindness, it stopped being generosity and became entitlement. And I knew the paint incident was only the beginning. The real storm was still waiting, dressed in lace, roses, and hundreds of sweet, smiling words ready to bite back at me the moment I let my guard down. A week after the White Gate incident, I forced myself to drive down to Portland for a family dinner. Mom had been calling nonstop, her tone the same as always, half tender, half scolding. "You can't stay angry forever. Taylor's stressed enough as it is, poor thing." I reluctantly agreed, mostly just to end the endless guilt tripping. It was a rainy evening, the highway blurred with mist. I drove for over 3 hours, my chest heavy, the image of that half-painted gate and Dylan's indifferent smile replaying in my mind. I knew something was slipping out of control. What I didn't know was just how far it had already gone. My parents' house sat in a quiet suburb, a 2-story cream-colored home where I'd grown up. From the outside, it looked the same as ever, yet I no longer felt that sense of home when I walked through the door. As I pushed it open, the smell of dinner mixed with Taylor's perfume drifted through the air. She was in the kitchen with Dylan, the two of them whispering and laughing softly, completely unaware that I'd arrived. I paused in the hallway not to eavesdrop, but their voices carried clearly. "After the wedding, we could stay there for a few months," Dylan said, his tone low and confident. "She doesn't have a husband, and there are plenty of spare rooms." Taylor giggled. "Exactly, and it's perfect. Beautiful lake view, big house, close to Seattle. I could even film a newlywed life vlog by the lake. She won't dare kick us out. Mom and Dad would take our side." Dylan chuckled, half joking, half serious. "Once you move in, just get pregnant fast. No one would ever throw out a pregnant woman." I went numb. For a moment, every sound in the house seemed to vanish. Then I stepped into the kitchen, my heels hitting the wood floor hard enough to make them both jump. "Stay where?" I asked, my voice cold as stone. Taylor spun around, her smile freezing midair. "Oh, sis, we were just talking nonsense about our honeymoon." Dylan stammered, pretending to adjust his watch. I looked straight at them. "I heard enough. You're planning to move into my house after the wedding, aren't you?" Neither of them spoke. Taylor rolled her eyes, then suddenly laughed. "Oh my God, you totally misheard. I was kidding." Dylan was joking, right, babe? Dylan gave a weak smile but avoided my gaze. Before I could say another word, my mother appeared from the living room carrying a tray of food. "What's going on here?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but Taylor was quicker. "Mom, we were just talking about moving out after the wedding, and Venus thought we meant moving into her house." My mother stopped in her tracks, her eyes lighting up. "Actually, that's not a bad idea. Venus's house is spacious. There are 2 extra guest rooms and a whole lower floor she doesn't even use. It would be convenient for them to stay there for a few months. Venus, what do you think?" I turned to her, stunned. "Mom, no. Absolutely not." She frowned. "Why are you being so tense?" I just said, "for a few months." I took a slow breath. There is no staying for a few months. That's my house, not a rental, and definitely not a place for anyone to just move into temporarily. The air turned heavy. Taylor gave a small, strained smile. "Sis, we just want to start our new life together. You don't have to make it such a big deal." I clenched my fists, forcing my voice steady. "Let me be clear. If anyone brings this up again, the wedding is off." The kitchen went dead silent. The ticking clock on the wall suddenly sounded deafening. My mother's mouth fell open, and my father, who had been sitting in the living room, came storming in, anger flashing in his eyes. "Venus, don't talk nonsense. The plans are already made, the money's been paid, the guests invited. You can't ruin your sister's big day over some minor disagreement." I looked at him, my chest tightening like a vice. "Minor disagreement? Dad, they're planning to move into my home without my consent. That's not a disagreement, that's trespassing." He sighed, his voice turning cold. "You always make things more complicated than they are. Families help each other. What are you so afraid of losing?" I stayed silent. Because I knew no matter what I said, it wouldn't matter. In their eyes, I was just the stubborn daughter who refused to get along. Taylor stood up, pretending to be on the verge of tears. It's okay, Mom. Leave her alone. I don't want to make her uncomfortable, even though I just wanted us to be closer. She turned away, dabbing at her eyes, but I caught the faint curve of a smirk at the corner of her lips. My mother sighed heavily, setting the tray of food down. Venus, can't you see? Your sister just wants love. If you keep being so cold, one day you'll regret it. I turned away, my voice low but steady. If regret means letting people walk all over my boundaries, then I'd rather never regret anything. Then I grabbed my coat and walked out, leaving behind a room thick with whispers and accusing stares. Driving back to Seattle, rain pounded hard against the windshield. I turned on the radio to drown out the noise in my head, but every song felt distant, hollow. Dylan's words echoed again and again. She doesn't have a husband, plenty of rooms anyway. Each repetition felt like a small, cold knife twisting deeper. Yes, I didn't have a husband. But that didn't make my home public property for others to use as they pleased. I built this life alone, brick by brick, beam by beam, and I owed nothing to anyone. From that day on, Taylor stopped calling. The only messages came from my mother, repetitive lines of guilt disguised as concern. I knew I had just become the villain in their story. They would tell people I was jealous, unloving, difficult. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I had finally seen what I'd tried for years to ignore. In my family, kindness was never enough unless it could be used. And this time, I swore they wouldn't take another piece of me. A month before the wedding, Seattle was still cold and misty in the mornings, like always. I was tending the plants in my garden when I heard a voice from across the fence. It was Mrs. Helen, the widowed woman who lived 2 houses down, the one who often lent me pruning shears or shared her freshly baked bread. She waved, her tone cheerful. "Morning, Venus. I heard you're remodeling your basement to make a little apartment for the newlyweds. How wonderful." I froze. "What apartment?" She smiled warmly. "Oh, your sister said you're letting them stay for a few months after the wedding. I even recommended an electrician to her because I know someone in the Contractors Guild." Her words hit me like a metal bell clanging in my skull. I forced a stiff smile, mumbled something polite, but inside a storm was rising. As soon as Mrs. Helen turned away, I pulled out my phone. The first call was to Taylor. She answered in a bright, carefree voice as if nothing was wrong. "Sis, I'm trying on my wedding dress right now. It's gorgeous. Want to see a picture?" I cut her off, my voice sharp and cold. "What are you telling people around here?" "They're saying you've been bragging that I'm fixing up the basement for you to stay in after the wedding." The line went silent for a few seconds. Then Taylor's voice returned, quieter, like someone caught red-handed. "I was just joking. People asked where we'd live after the wedding, and I teased that maybe you'd let us stay. I didn't think they'd believe me." I clenched my teeth. Don't joke by lying about someone else's house. But before I could say more, I heard the sound of sniffles. Taylor started to cry, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, I'm panicking. I'm pregnant, don't you understand? I just want somewhere stable. I don't know what else to do." I went still. Part of me wanted to believe her. Another part recognized the pattern, the choked, helpless sobs designed to make me soften. I'd heard it so many times before. But this time, there was something different in her tone, something raw and genuinely fragile. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. I'm 6 weeks pregnant," she answered between sobs. "We haven't told Mom and Dad yet. We're scared people will say we rushed into it, but you're the first person I trust enough to tell." I sank into my chair. The news hit me like a stone dropped straight into my chest. For a moment, all the anger drained away, leaving only emptiness and a quiet ache. "Congratulations," I said softly, forcing my voice to stay calm. "But even so, you still can't live here. This isn't a shelter, Taylor." There was silence on the other end. Then her voice changed, no longer trembling, but sharp and bitter. "I knew it. You never wanted to help me. You always think you're better than everyone else." I closed my eyes, feeling my heartbeat quicken. "You're wrong. I'm not better than anyone. I just want peace. But she never heard that last line. Taylor had already hung up. That night, I sat for hours at my desk, the warm light falling on a stack of sticky notes covered in scribbles, wedding logistics, contract clauses, and words I never thought I'd have to write about my own sister. Defense. New locks. Evidence. Finally, I called Alex Martinez, the attorney who had helped me buy the house last year. He was a calm, middle-aged man with a steady, reassuring voice. After listening to everything, he was silent for a few seconds before saying, "Venus, you need to protect yourself. Legally speaking, if they move in even for one night and receive mail at that address, they could claim temporary residency rights. You don't want that to happen." A chill ran through me. The next day, Alex sent me a draft of a legal notice nearly 10 pages long, clearly stating, Taylor William and Dylan Ross have no, and will never have any, rights of residence, tenancy, or ownership at the property belonging to Venus William. Any deliberate act of remaining, entering, or staying beyond permitted hours shall constitute trespassing under Washington state law. He instructed me to sign it in front of a notary, keep a certified original copy, and post another on the main gate on the day of the event. So everything's clear before someone pretends not to understand. I also called a locksmith to replace every lock in the house, even the gate to the backyard. The locksmith asked, "Did you lose your keys?" I gave a faint smile. "No, I lost my trust." After that, I contacted a security company in Bellevue and hired them to install 8 cameras around the property, covering the garden and the driveway. Every time I looked at the monitor showing my quiet backyard, I felt as though I was building an invisible wall between myself and the rest of my family. 3 days later, my mother called. "Did you change the locks?" Her voice was sharp. "Taylor said she came by to get some decorations and couldn't get in." "What are you trying to prove?" I stayed calm. "I'm just protecting my property. She doesn't need to enter when I'm not home." My mother let out a bitter laugh. "Property? Is that what you call it now? You sound like a stranger. You're such a disappointment." I could hear her sigh long and heavy, like an old curse. "You're becoming more and more like an outsider. You must be proud of yourself, making your sister cry." I answered quietly, "I'm not proud, but at least, I'm at peace." Oh. That night, I emailed Alex, asking him to come to my house on the morning of the wedding with the original contract and proof of ownership. I also hired 2 local security officers to stand guard from morning till night to monitor all guests entering and leaving, as required by the neighborhood association. Before bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The wind from the lake was cold against my skin. Under the yellow porch light, the small metal sign I had just mounted gleamed with the words, "Private property. No unauthorized entry." I stared at it for a long time. Part of me found it almost absurd that I had to rely on fences, cameras, and lawyers just to protect a place I called home. But then I remembered Dylan's words. "She doesn't have a husband, plenty of rooms anyway." That sentence alone was enough to remind me that if I didn't speak up, my silence would be taken as permission. And this time, I swore, I would not stay silent. The morning of the wedding, a thin veil of fog draped over Seattle like gray silk. The pale sunlight shimmered across Lake Sammamish, calm and fragile, the kind of peace I knew wouldn't last. It was 6:30 a.m. when the first truck rumbled up the driveway. I glanced at the camera feed, the wedding planner, 2 assistants, and a full team hauling in flowers, chairs, speakers, and photo backdrops. Standing by the window, I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself like a gracious host, but watching the chaos unfold outside made my stomach twist. They streamed into the backyard without knocking, laughing and shouting directions as if they were stepping onto a film set they already owned. Around 8 o'clock, a woman in a white suit, the lead planner, walked up to the front door and spoke to the security guard I'd hired. "I need to go inside to prepare the bridal suite for the bride, Miss." Venus already agreed. I heard her and stepped out. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice calm but firm. "The master bedroom is not part of the permitted area. No one goes into the main house today." The planner's eyes widened. But the bride needs a place to change, to do her makeup, to shoot the first look video. Your room would be perfect. I shook my head. That room isn't for any video. There's a hotel 10 minutes away, they can use a room there. The planner glanced at me, then at the guards, as if waiting for someone to override me. I gestured for them to hold their ground. The woman muttered something under her breath, pulled out her phone, and within minutes I got a call from my mother. Venus, her voice came through, high and agitated. What's going on? The planner says you won't let her use the room to prepare for your sister. That's right, I replied evenly. No one is allowed inside the house. They already have a hotel for that. On the other end, my mother exhaled loudly, then slipped into her familiar pleading tone. Just one room, Venus. You've made your sister cry. She's panicking. Her hands are shaking while they do her makeup. Don't ruin her big day. I looked out at the yard and saw Taylor in a white robe, posing for her friend's vlog camera, her voice breaking theatrically. She hates me. She wants me to be humiliated in front of everyone. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. No, I said slowly. Just one boundary, Mom. One final boundary. Then I hung up. By noon, the backyard had transformed into a stunning scene, a white floral arch by the lake, chairs tied with silk ribbons, and long tables lined with candles and crystal glasses. But one detail stopped me cold: the rows of chairs stretched almost across the entire lawn, far beyond what had been approved in the original layout. I counted quietly, then checked the guest list again. 80 names. Before me stood at least 130 chairs. I called Dylan over. Did you add 50 more seats? He shrugged, his tone mocking. A few distant relatives, some friends of her parents, it's no big deal. You're really going to count chairs at a wedding? You're such a buzzkill. I met his gaze squarely. Because I'm the one who'll be fined if the neighbors complain about overcrowding. I'm also the one responsible if the lawn gets damaged. Call your team and remove them now. Dylan scoffed. You really are the typical uptight office type. Don't you want your sister's big day to be perfect? I replied evenly. What I want is for my house to still be standing after today. He muttered something under his breath but finally waved at the workers to remove a few rows of chairs, grumbling curses as they did. The ceremony began later that afternoon, as the sunset bathed the lake in gold. Soft violin music floated through the air, the wind stirred the maples, scattering white petals across the wooden steps I'd once painted myself. I had to admit the view was breathtaking. Taylor, in her ivory gown, held Dylan's arm and smiled, that flawless smile, the same one that had overshadowed me all my life. I stood off to the side, near the porch, careful not to meet my mother's eyes as she wept from emotion. In that moment, I felt like a spectator in my own story, pushed to the margins, watching a world I had built revolve around everyone but me. As dusk settled, the dinner reception began. Golden string lights glowed across the garden, and the music pounded louder than it had all day. The planner had promised only acoustic sets, but it was clear Dylan had brought in a DJ. I walked over to the security guard. Shut the music down at 9:30, just like in the contract. He nodded, understanding. At the table nearby, I overheard my mother laughing, saying, Venus acts like every rule is sacred. Everyone bends them a little. The words cut like a small, dull knife, not deep, but sharp enough to sting. By 9 p.m., the music was blaring. Guests were drunk, dancing barefoot on the grass, laughter echoing across the lake. Taylor grabbed the microphone, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. A huge thank you to my sister Venus for making my dream come true. I promise I'll make you proud. The crowd roared with applause. Someone shouted, "Speech, speech." I didn't respond, I just looked at my watch, 9:28. At 9:30 sharp, I signaled the guards. They nodded, and within seconds, the garden lights went out. The music stopped mid-beat. The sudden silence was pierced only by the sound of crickets in the dark. Guests froze, then murmured in confusion. Dylan stormed toward me. What's going on? Why'd you cut the power? I answered calmly, the party's over, it's in the contract. Taylor stumbled forward, her face flushed with wine and rage. What the hell are you doing? It's only 9:30. People haven't even danced yet. You ruined my wedding day. I looked at her, my eyes cold as the lake after rain. No, I said quietly. I just saved my house. Everyone around us fell silent. In that moment, I saw the line so clearly, the one dividing two worlds. On one side, chaos, noise, and pretense. On the other, the quiet I had fought so hard to protect. Taylor stood frozen, her face a mix of anger and confusion. And me, for the first time in my life, I felt something close to victory. Not because I'd beaten them, but because I had finally dared to say enough. 2 weeks after the wedding, the Seattle sky hung heavy and gray. I was making coffee when I heard the low rumble of an engine outside the gate. A sharp, prolonged honk followed, shrill and deliberate, like the announcement of something I'd feared yet always known would come. I stepped onto the porch and glanced at the security monitor. A yellow moving truck sat at the gate, packed with boxes, suitcases, a tall houseplant, even a cat carrier. In front of it stood Taylor, wearing a white sweater, her hair tied back, her face stripped of the radiant glow she'd worn as a bride, now replaced by exhaustion and defiance. Beside her was Dylan, arms crossed, his expression cold and unapologetic. And behind them, I saw my parents, my mother in a gray wool coat, my father standing stiff and solemn, as if attending a family conference rather than preparing to invade their daughter's home. I didn't open the door. I had prepared for this. From the car parked at the curb stepped a man in a gray suit, Alex Martinez, my attorney. He held a thick stack of documents in one hand, and the reflection on his thin metal glasses made everything around him look sharper, colder. As the truck came to a stop, Alex walked directly down the driveway. I stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand, watching. Taylor spoke first. "Sis, we're here." Her voice tried to sound cheerful but faltered mid-sentence. Dylan opened the back of the truck and barked orders to the movers. "Careful with those boxes, there's electronics inside." My mother called out nervously, forcing a smile. Venus opened the gate. "Sweetheart, it's about to rain." Alex spoke, his voice clear and cold. "Good afternoon, Miss William, Mr. Ross. I am the legal representative of the homeowner, Miss Venus William. Before you proceed with any actions, I am required to inform you that." He opened the folder, his tone steady and precise, each word cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. "You and your husband have no, and have never had, any legal right of residence at this property. Any attempt to enter, remain, or store personal belongings within these premises will be considered trespassing under Washington state law. This is a certified copy of the official notice, notarized and already sent to your current address last week." Taylor froze, her hand still gripping the van door. Her eyes flicked to the document as if unable to process what she was hearing. "What?" she gasped, her voice breaking. "Sis, what is this? You can't be serious, I'm your sister." Alex's tone remained calm and measured. "This isn't a family matter, it's a legal one. You are not permitted to be here. If you persist, we will have no choice but to contact local law enforcement." Dylan took a step forward, his face flushed red. "Who the hell do you think you are to tell us what to do? This is family business, not a courtroom." Alex didn't flinch. "I'm the person who will represent Miss Venus in court if you force me to." His words cracked through the air like thunder. My mother suddenly screamed, her voice shrill, trembling with rage. "Venus, you're disgracing this family. How could you bring a lawyer to fight your own sister?" I looked at her, and for a moment, it felt like every memory stacked itself over the years. Every time she defended Taylor without question, every time she made me the villain for simply standing my ground. But this time, something inside me had changed. "No," I said slowly, each word sharp and deliberate. "I'm not disgracing anyone. I'm protecting what I've built. This house is not a trophy for anyone to claim. It's mine because I earned it." My father stepped forward, trying to keep his composure, though anger had already crept into his voice. "Venus, you can throw them out like strangers if you want, but don't forget this is still your family. We don't take each other to court over a few months of staying under the same roof." I met his gaze, my tone unwavering. "You're right, Dad. This is my family, and that's exactly why I've been swallowing my pride for 29 years, but not today. From now on, anyone who crosses this line without permission is a stranger." Taylor gripped Dylan's hand tightly, her eyes glistening but not weak. "You really have no heart left, do you?" she said, her voice trembling. "You know I'm pregnant, and you still do this?" I gave a faint, bitter smile. I'd seen this coming. Being pregnant doesn't give you the right to violate someone else's home, and if that's true, then I hope you raise your child better than the way you're acting right now. Do-won. The air grew taut, stretched like a string about to snap. Dylan shot me a venomous glare, then turned to my mother. "We don't have to take this humiliation. Call the cops, let's see if they dare arrest us." I heard every word and replied calmly, "Good idea." I pulled out my phone and dialed the local police number Alex had given me in advance. About 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars arrived, their red and blue lights flickering across the lake's surface. The officers approached, asked a few questions, and Alex handed them the paperwork. One middle-aged officer read through it, then turned to Taylor. "Ma'am, everything appears to be in order. Unless you have documents proving residency, I'm required to ask you and your husband to leave the premises immediately." Taylor's voice cracked into a furious scream. "I just wanted to stay temporarily. She's my sister. You can't throw me out of my sister's house." The officer's reply was calm but final. "This house isn't yours, ma'am, and if you refuse to leave, we'll have to file a report." My mother sobbed, clutching my hands. "Please, sweetheart, just for a little while until they find another place. They're about to be parents." I gently pulled my hands away, my eyes stinging. "I told you already, Mom. Kindness can't save people who only know how to take advantage of it." The police escorted them off the property. Dylan muttered curses under his breath, while Taylor stayed silent. Just before getting into the truck, she turned back to look at me. There were no tears this time, no trace of the helpless victim she'd played before. Her eyes were hollow, cold, so cold they made my skin crawl. That wasn't my sister anymore. It was someone who had just sworn revenge. As the moving truck disappeared around the bend, Alex gathered the documents and said quietly, "You did the right thing, Venus. They can't touch you now." I nodded, but the relief never came. I stood in the middle of the driveway, staring at the tire marks streaked across the freshly washed concrete, then looked up at the sky. The rain had begun to fall, small, cold drops, quiet and heavy, just like the feeling in my chest. I couldn't tell if I was trembling from the chill or from the bitter truth that, sometimes, to be free, you have to lose your family. 3 days after their truck left, I thought it was finally over. I slept for hours, my first real rest in weeks, no nightmares, no noise. But I had underestimated Taylor. She never accepted defeat, especially not at my hands, the sister she always called the uptight one who doesn't know how to live. That morning, as I sat in a cafe near work sipping coffee, my phone began to vibrate nonstop. Notifications from Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, hundreds of messages, tags, angry emojis, and furious comments. A friend texted me a link. "You need to see this." I clicked it. The screen opened to a 10-minute video titled in bold capital letters, "My sister threw me and my unborn child out into the rain." In the video, Taylor sat inside a car, her face pale, her eyes red and glossy, her voice trembling as if she might break at any moment. "I didn't want to share this," she said, barely holding back tears, "but my heart hurts too much. My sister, the one I loved and trusted most, threw me, my husband, and our unborn baby out of the house. We only asked to stay for a few months, just until after the baby was born. But she told me, being pregnant doesn't give you the right to trespass on someone else's property. Tell me, what kind of sister says something like that? Now I have no home, no one to turn to. I just want people to understand that sometimes success can make people lose their hearts." In the final shot, Taylor covered her face, sobbing. Dylan sat beside her, expression grim, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Outside, the sound of rain tapped softly against the car window just enough to make the moment feel heartbreakingly real. A line of text faded onto the screen. Don't let anyone make you feel worthless just because you don't have their money. And just like that, the wave began. Within 12 hours, the video had reached over 3 million views. The comments section was a flood of outrage. Heartless monster. How can a woman treat her own sister like that? I hope she loses everything the way she made her sister lose her home. I received hundreds of anonymous messages, some calling me a witch, others sending pictures of unborn babies with captions like, "This is what you destroyed." I sat silently in front of my computer screen, watching thousands of comments crash down like waves. Part of me wanted to scream, to reply to every single person and tell them they didn't know the truth. But another part of me felt utterly drained. I had grown used to being misunderstood, but never like this, never so publicly, never with such cruelty. Alex, my lawyer, called the moment he saw the video. "You can't stay silent, Venus. In this era, silence is a form of public suicide. You have evidence, don't you?" I looked up at the security monitor rows of camera feeds neatly archived on a hard drive. What I had installed to protect my house, I now realized, was the only thing that could protect my name. That afternoon, I drove to Alex's office with the hard drive, a copy of the wedding contract, every text message, and the recordings of my calls with Taylor. He went through them one by one, his eyes sharp with focus. "This," he said, tapping the screen, "is enough to turn the tide. But are you ready? Once you post this, it won't just be about defending yourself, it'll expose everything. And when it does, your family will shatter for good." I met his gaze and said quietly but firmly, "That family already broke a long time ago, they just refused to see it." The next day, I posted a single message on my social media page, accompanied by an 8-minute video titled simply, "The Truth." I didn't say a single cruel word. I just played the footage from my security camera, recorded 2 weeks before the wedding. Taylor sitting in my backyard with her friend Kelsey, both laughing softly. "Are you actually pregnant?" Kelsey asked. "Not yet," Taylor replied, smirking. "But we'll make sure it happens right after we move into my sister's place. Once I'm pregnant, she won't dare throw us out. Is that okay?" "Of course. She's just uptight, but Mom will back me up. She never wants to look like the bad guy." Then, I attached all the remaining evidence, the signed contract stating no residency rights, Dylan's threatening text that read, "You'll see who wins." And finally, an audio clip of my mother's voice saying, "She's not pregnant, she's just trying to make you bend." I wrote a short caption under the video. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But when the truth is twisted to turn me into a villain, I can't stay silent anymore. This isn't about family, it's about honesty. The video spread just as fast as Taylor's had. Within hours, the views skyrocketed. People who had once cursed me began deleting their comments or switching sides. Online forums, Seattle blogs, and even entertainment news outlets started reporting. Influencer fakes pregnancy to steal sister's home. The digital wall Taylor had built crumbled overnight. Brand deals were canceled. Her Instagram flooded with furious comments, "Liar, queen of manipulation. Thank you, Venus, for teaching us about boundaries." Dylan deleted all their wedding photos within 2 days, and Taylor turned off her comments before vanishing from social media completely. My family fell apart. Half of my relatives called to apologize, saying they had no idea things were that bad. My aunt, who had once criticized me the harshest, sent a 3-page email telling me she admired how I stayed composed. But the other half, my parents included, said nothing. My mother finally called late one night, her voice hoarse with anger and exhaustion. "You destroyed your sister's life. She won't even step outside now. Are you proud of yourself?" I sat on the couch, staring out at the lake. The golden light shimmered across the surface like a trembling heartbeat. "No, Mom," I said softly. "I'm just tired." There was silence on the line before she whispered, "You two used to swim in that lake together, laughing all afternoon. How did it come to this? I didn't answer because honestly, I didn't know when love between sisters had turned into a weapon. My father never called. He only sent a short text: "Whatever you do, don't drag outsiders into family matters." I read it and felt nothing but emptiness. In that single sentence, I could hear my entire past, the way every wrongdoing had always been swept under the family rug for the sake of keeping face. But this time, I no longer cared about appearances. I chose the truth, even if it hurt everyone involved. A week later, the news cycle moved on. The headlines faded, the outrage cooled, and all that remained were a few short articles, like the final punctuation of a long, chaotic sentence. I went back to work, my mind still heavy, but my chest lighter than it had been in years. The lakeside house was quiet again, filled only with the sound of wind through the maples and water brushing against the shore. I knew I had just survived a war few people ever dare to fight, not just for a home, but for the right to speak for myself. Taylor never reached out again. Someone said she and Dylan moved to Arizona. I didn't ask. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the selfish daughter they always painted me to be. I was simply a woman who had learned to stand her ground in the storm and to choose truth, even when it meant standing alone. In the months that followed, the house by Lake Sammamish returned to a stillness so complete it sometimes frightened me. No more ringing phones, no more relatives demanding explanations. No more neighbors watching me over the fence. Only the soft lap of water against the shore, and the wind weaving through the trees on my porch. The storm had passed, but I knew it had left cracks that would never fully heal. Taylor disappeared from social media almost overnight. A few of her former influencer friends said that brands quickly terminated their contracts, her ad accounts were suspended, and the public turned against her completely. The woman who faked a pregnancy to steal her sister's house, that phrase dominated Reddit and Twitter for an entire week. Dylan went down with her. The gym where he worked as a trainer received so many negative reviews that they had to end his employment. Not long after, I heard they'd left Seattle, moving in with a distant relative in Nevada. Part of me wanted them to learn a lesson, but another part just felt sad. After all, she was still my sister, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders during long walks around the lake. As for me, instead of feeling vindicated, I felt only a quiet emptiness. The anger that had burned inside me for years suddenly went out, leaving only ashes and a deep exhaustion. I began to cut all contact with my family. No messages, no phone calls, no Christmas reunions. In my contacts, I moved their numbers into a separate group called The Past. Not out of hatred, but because I needed space to breathe. I threw myself into work at the architecture firm in downtown Seattle, where I had just been promoted to lead designer. For the first few weeks, I stayed late every night, working partly to forget and partly to prove to myself that I was still strong enough to stand on my own. But what slowly began to change me wasn't work, it was a small invitation. My coworker, Sarah, handed me a flyer for a support group called Adult Children of Narcissistic Families. The first time I went, the meeting room in the basement of a small church in Fremont had only about 8 people. Everyone sat in a circle, the light soft, the voices gentle. An older woman with silver hair shared that her mother used to make her hand over her entire paycheck. A young man said his sister blamed him for every failure in their family. When it was my turn to speak, my throat tightened. I didn't know where to begin. Finally, I said softly, "I used to think that if I did everything right, they would love me. Now I understand some people only love you when they can control you." The room fell silent for a moment before the silver-haired woman smiled and nodded. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. In the weeks that followed, I attended the meetings regularly. I learned how to recognize emotional manipulation, how to say no without guilt, and how to accept that not every relationship can be saved. I pinned a small note on my bedroom wall with a quote from the group's counselor. "Boundaries aren't walls, they are doors that only you hold the key to." Every morning when I woke up, I read that sentence as a reminder that I had the right to decide who could enter my life. Around that time, I also started talking more with Nathan, a colleague from my architecture team. He was quiet, but he had a way of listening that made people feel safe. We had worked on several projects together before, but it wasn't until after everything happened that I realized how often he had quietly been there for me. The cup of coffee he brought the morning after the scandal, the short congratulatory email that said, "You deserve this," and sometimes just the comfortable silence when we stayed late at the office. One evening, after work, Nathan invited me to dinner at a small restaurant by Lake Union. Under the dim lights, he said softly, "I don't think you're a cruel person, Venus. I think you're someone who's spent too long apologizing for protecting yourself." I looked at him, a lump rising in my throat. No one had ever said that to me before. In the evenings that followed, Nathan and I began seeing each other more often. He never asked about my past or the family drama. He simply showed up. Once, when I hesitated over a message from my mother, he said, "Replying isn't always kindness. Sometimes, silence is how you love yourself." I laughed softly. "You sound like a therapist." He shrugged. "Maybe, I just had to learn that the hard way." As for my mother, she started sending handwritten letters. The first was short, her tone still heavy with resentment. "I don't understand why you chose to expose everything online. Our family didn't deserve that kind of shame." The second, a month later, was softer. "I know I was wrong to take your sister's side, but I was just scared to watch her fall apart. Now I realize you've been falling apart for years too." The third arrived in autumn and contained only one line. "If you're not ready to forgive me yet, I'll wait." I read each letter carefully, then placed them in a wooden box inside my closet. I hadn't replied not because of anger, but because I needed quiet to heal. Sometimes, when I sat on the porch watching the lake shimmer under the evening light, memories of our childhood returned, Taylor chasing after me, laughing, holding the paper kite our mother made. Those memories were still beautiful, even blurred by time and tears. I didn't want to erase them. I just wanted to keep them as a reminder that love isn't always salvation. Sometimes, it's the lesson that teaches you how to save yourself. I don't know where Taylor is now, and honestly, I don't need to. All I know is that, after everything, I learned how to rise not through anger, but through peace. Nathan often says, "A house only truly becomes yours when you're no longer afraid of someone knocking on the door." And every time I hear it, I smile, because at last, I've turned the house that was once a battlefield into a place of calm that belongs entirely to me. A year later, spring arrived in Seattle. The maples along Lake Sammamish sprouted tender green leaves, swaying gently in the breeze. I stood before a newly completed building, the biggest project of my career. The Havenlight Community Center, a space for women who had survived abuse and emotional trauma. The center sat on a wide piece of land surrounded by wildflowers, with tall glass windows designed to let in as much natural light as possible. Every curve, every open corner, carried the spirit of freedom of those who had once been suffocated and were now learning to breathe again. When I first took on the project, people asked why I chose a nonprofit direction right after earning a promotion at a prestigious architecture firm. My answer was simple. Because I know what it feels like to be hurt by the people who were supposed to protect you. Each brick, each line I drew, held a piece of my story, the story of a woman who took years to realize that kindness doesn't always mean silence. On the day of the opening, the center glowed under the early summer Sunday. Women who had been supported by other organizations came to celebrate, some carrying flowers, others holding children. Laughter mingled with the sound of an acoustic guitar drifting from the garden. I stood on the small wooden stage, looking down at those faces, tired yet radiant, fragile yet strong. And in that moment, I realized I had finally stepped out of the shadow of my past. When the host introduced me, the room fell completely silent. I walked up to the stage, my hands trembling slightly, but my gaze steady. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice calm. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here, I probably wouldn't have believed them. Back then, I had just escaped a storm called family, something I once thought was the safest place in the world. I paused, taking a slow breath before continuing. But there's one thing I've learned: sometimes, you have to accept being called cruel, ungrateful, or heartless simply because you dared to say no. But that no is what saves you from a life being taken over, from people who only know how to love when they can control you. And when you finally learn to protect your own boundaries, you begin to rebuild your life not from the ruins, but from the strength that was once overlooked. The room stayed quiet. A few people nodded, others wiped away tears. I smiled softly, glancing toward the glass windows, where sunlight shimmered across the small lake in the distance. This center, I continued, is more than just architecture. It's proof that every wound can become a source of light if you're brave enough to face it. All by. Applause broke out, warm and full. I stepped down from the stage. Nathan was waiting near the front row, his eyes filled with pride. He took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze, no words, just a quiet nod that said, "You did it." Sarah, my friend, and the one who had brought me to that first therapy group, handed me a small bouquet of lavender, the same flowers I always planted on my porch. "You deserve this piece," she whispered. I smiled, my heart weightless. As the ceremony ended, I walked out to the parking lot, a soft breeze carrying the scent of fresh timber and wildflowers. I reached for my car door when I saw an envelope tucked under the windshield wiper, cream-colored with no sender's name, just a familiar hand. To Venus. My chest tightened. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, my mother's handwriting. "Venus, I came today but didn't want to intrude. I stood outside watching you speak to the crowd. You looked happier and more at peace than I've ever seen you. Now I understand why you had to do it, why you chose silence. I used to think you were cruel, but you were only learning how to survive. I don't blame you anymore. I'm proud. Mom." I read every line, my hands trembling. In that moment, the bitterness inside me seemed to melt away. I didn't cry. I just felt a quiet settling over me, as if the last storm had finally left the sky. I slipped the letter into my bag, sat in the driver's seat, and looked out at the lake. The sunset spread gold across the water, tiny ripples catching the light like shards of glass. Softly, I whispered to myself. They used to say I was too cold to be loved. But in the end, I only learned how to love myself. And for the first time, I loved that stillness, the same stillness that once scared me, now a shelter for my soul. As dusk fell, I started the engine. The radio played an old song I used to listen to on my loneliest nights. The road by the lake unfurled ahead of me, winding between trees where light and shadow blended. I knew the journey wasn't over, there would still be weekdays, memories that pressed on the ache. But now I had my compass, self-trust, boundaries, and the peace I built with my own hands. As the car rounded the bend, I caught a glimpse of the Haven Light Center in the rearview mirror. Its sign reflected the sun, glowing like a promise that every wound, if you dare to heal it, can become the foundation for something new. I smiled. In my head echoed a line I once wrote in my journal, now sounding like a declaration. She used my house for her wedding. But I used that pain to build a life no one could take from me. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly free.